Chapter 2. Whittling Woman. She was far from pretty and didn't care. Her hair was lank and her nose a button, and her girl shape was stuffed into a faded shirt and patched jeans. Her honeysuckle basket held dress and shoes, but there would be time for those later. She swung lithely through the woods, her quick eye noting squirrel in oak and turtle on log. She had come farther from Cat Track Hollow than she had ever been in her born days. Farther than any of her folks had ever been, except Grandsir and Uncle Bide, who had together once rolled a hogshead of tobacco clear to Marienboro. In a dozen miles, the world changes. Chestnuts, dogwood, and shoulder-high rhododendrons become spruce, pine, and balsam. The big creek turns into little tinkling branches, and the branches into barely whispering springs. Though after a ridge is crossed and its slope descended, there are thickening chestnuts again, and banks of moss that feel good to the soles, and crunchy violets. She saw cabins, but kept out of sight. Yet through screening thickets she took account of the many patterns new to her, of woven coverlets hanging over porch rails. She observed the man who cast mud upon a whirling table and caused it to grow into a bean pot even while you stole a look. Uncle Bide, who could tap a round iron bolt into a true square and scarcely glance as he tapped, who could tan you a pelt or make you a chair or braid you a corn shuck hat almost as quickly as you could think to whittle a wooden egg. Uncle Bide couldn't throw mud and make it grow into pots and jugs. This was getting into foreign parts, for certain. For the first time she wondered if she would have courage to march into the town still far ahead. She sat down on a beechwood-shaded bank and took the shoes from her basket. They'd never been worn because her sister Corey, who owned them, had not placed foot out of bed in 2 years. Her own feet had no hanker for them, but Uncle Bide, who made them from the skin of a yearling, had told her she would surely need them in Marienboro. Unlike the shoes pictured in her sick-a-bed sister's wish book, these were just alike. "Wear 'em a while as they come, then switch to the other foot," Bide had said. "Makes 'em more lasty." She had stockings in the basket, too, but there was no call to waste them. She dusted her feet off with a handful of fern, viewed her well-shaped arches, and slipped the shoes on. She continued on her way. A stump yonder in the azaleas startled her by sprouting legs and rising. It was a youth she had never seen before, in shirt more faded than her own and stone-gray trousers. His hair was the bleached white of basket oak, and his eyes were clear and blue. He had a bundle inside his shirt. He simply fell in and matched strides with her, which was easy for him, for his legs were long. Surprise and dismay at herself for not having known a stump from a boy gave her a flutter and a hotness, but the habit of silence checked her tongue. He didn't say anything either. If shoes squeezed this way in 100 steps, she was going to have a time breaking her feet to them. She dropped to a log to change them to the other foot around, as Uncle Bide had counseled. The boy watched. "Don't stand and stare," she snapped, rightly vexed. He reached a hand, took one of the shoes. "That there's tannin'." "Of course. Uncle Bide is the best tanner in Cat Track Holler. That means he's best in the whole world." "What kind of place is Cat Track Holler?" "You don't know how fine Cat Track is? My, you're ignorant, aren't you?" He looked at her closely, the way he looked at the shoe. Eyed her for grain, for texture, and probably found flaws a many. He kept his judgment to himself, but she felt she could guess it. She was plain. She was homely. Often enough she'd heard it from neighbors. She'd observed it, though, little enough troubled by it, whenever she knelt to the spring-house pool. She'd been glad, only glad, that all the beauty in the family had gone to Corey. To see Corey lying helpless, never complaining, dark hair spread out on the pillow, dark eyes charged with pain, was enough to break your heart into little pieces. But having this gangling boy stand here, taking his gaze of you, noting your lacks, filled the wayfaring girl with resentment. She had never felt this way before. She snatched up the shoe from him, put both shoes in the basket, got up and moved swiftly on. She scorned to look behind her. Shagbarks and chinkapins, basswoods and birches sped by and yielded to pines once more. She came to a gap in the stony heights, and only her self-control as a woods girl kept her from jumping when he spoke. He informed, "Marionborough's yonder." So he was a woodsman and a good one, and all that hour she hadn't heard his tread. Who cares? She hadn't said she was going to Marionborough. He glanced at her with those blue eyes that had shrewdness in them. "You're away from Cat Track Holler, ain't you? Trying out new shoes, ain't you? There's a fair at Marionborough, ain't there? Where else would you be aiming?" He added shyly, "I'm bound for Marionborough too." She was properly angered. She came of fiercely independent stock and didn't like his taste of interference. She didn't admire being followed, and she liked even less to be caught up with. He continued, "What you aiming to sell?" What she aimed to sell was none of his business. He pressed, "Why you aiming to sell it?" "So my sister can buy something from the wish book." The words popped out. Corey, lying day after day on her back, day after day turning the pages of the mail house catalogue, had never in her life had a fotched-on package. "She younger than you?" "Yes." "Pretty?" If he was trying to mock her, the girl on the ridge top felt no call to answer. He laughed when she stood silent. "She's young or her kin wouldn't go to trouble for her. She's pretty or she wouldn't pine so for things out of a wish book." He scanned the light basket tucked beneath Ellie's elbow. "What you're carting to the fair ain't as big as a coverlet or as fat as a jug or loaf, for then it wouldn't go into that poke. I'll make a guess. It's a Whittling." She was nettled. "You're too smarty for your britches." He took that calmly. She flamed. "You'll stop follering me right here. You go your way, I'll go mine." He said, "You're madder than a jig bass. It upsets your judgment." "What do you know that proves your judgment so sharp?" "I know it's going to rain." She would have smelled it before, would have noticed the sky clabbering up, if she hadn't been so intent on putting distance between them. She refused to feed his self-esteem. "What of that?" He looked up to where the clouds were huddling. A change came over him. He became rapt. Stock still. "Hear them?" She heard nothing but the small stir of pine needles in the soft gust. He said reverently, "Swans, flying south." She scoffed at that. "Shows what you know. Uncle Bide says there are no swans left over this country." "He's wrong. Cat Track Holler must be way down deep in Shatter." "Where are you from?" "Old Dad Knob." "Then go there." Abruptly she turned to the left and started down the steep slope in a new direction, though Marionborough had lain in a true line ahead. She thought to lose him. She found herself running. She slipped, slid, recovered, sprang from trunk to trunk, stumbled and fell headlong. She brought up in a tangle of hackberry. She got to her feet nimbly. Drops fell. Warm, splashy drops. She held out her hands to them, turned up her face to them. They spattered her hair. She moved along the bank of a noisy stream, occasionally taking to the middle of its boulder-strewn bed. A roll of thunder grumbled along the ridges. The downpour grew. It drenched her shoulders. She took shelter under a leaning sycamore. The ravine was darkened by shadow and storm and the lengthening day. "You dropped your knife." She spun, so he had kept pace with her in spite of her flight. Her hand went to the sheath at her hip. Empty. "It's a right good knife," he handed it to her. Appalled at her carelessness, she took it. "It's almost as good as mine." The knife he drew from a pocket and held for her to see was quite unlike her own. Uncle Bide had made hers from a hacksaw blade and set it into a horn handle. The boy's was four-bladed, and it folded. "I whittle some too," he said. The rain sheeted. He moved in under the leaning trunk beside her. He asked, "Ever whittle a bear?" She didn't reply. Never had she had a strange man this close to her. He smelled of woods and sweat. He reached out into the rain, cut a wrist-thick branch of wild plum, hacked off a chunk. Rapidly he hewed. The thing became a bear, crude but vigorous. "That's not whittling where I come from." She took the bear. Her knife struck off head and paws. She cut, she trimmed. Rain hammered on the leafage, but she gave it no heed. "There." She held the object out on her strong young hand. It was as dainty as a windflower. What is it? A deer. I don't see a deer. I see a turkey. He took the thing and whacked off antler and legs. He worked busily. There. She laughed, who'd learned whittling from her grandsir and Uncle Bide. He exclaimed, You don't like this turkey? What can you whittle that's so much better? She opened her basket. From under shoes and stockings she drew it forth. It was wrapped in broad maple leaves. Uncle Bide had said when he first saw the wonder she'd carved, You're a sure enough whittling woman, Ellen Beckett. Ain't just about nobody in Cat Track Holler, which means nobody in any place, can use a knife like you. She laid back the leaves and held the treasure on her palm. It was a little wooden fox, the size of a tight fist. She looked at the youth from old Dad Nob. Triumph sang in her eyes. What else had Uncle Bide said in his admiration? If this fox you've made could be got to the fair, it would surely take prize for mountain whittling. $15, maybe. If you're willing, Ellie Beckett, I'll take it to Marianborough, though many's a mile and my leg hurts. But Uncle Bide had slipped on a log and bent his good leg till it was lamer than the bad one. So Ellie, telling nobody but him, had risen before daylight and set out for Marianborough. Boughs tossed, rain cascaded, and the youth studied the carving. Right nice piece of pear wood, he judged finally. Cut in the fall when the sap's down, said Ellie, her voice soft and proud. Dyed red with coon root. 'Tain't bad. Of course it wasn't bad. It was wonderful. 'Tain't good either. What do you mean? She was indignant. I'll show you. He reached into his shirt and drew out a bundle wrapped in a rag. He unrolled the wrapping. He smoothed a place on the earth and stood something there. A blue heron. Lean neck doubled into a flattened S. Eyes trained on something below. Lifted foot and slid it forward so stealthily as to make hardly a ripple. Surely the spear-like bill would dart downward as they watched, would come up with a frog or fish. She knelt to the little marvel, crying out. Here was perfection. See? Yes, she saw. Carved from a knot of holly, here was whittling such as Cat Track Holler had never dreamed of. But that ain't nothing, he told her. Anybody can watch a heron stab fish. He reached into his shirt again. Here's what almost nobody ever gets to see. It was a line of birds in flight. Long necks forward, feet back, wings out with strong, tireless grace, bill to tail they streamed. They were cut from a single branch of sycamore, a harsh and unhandy wood, chosen for its challenge, she decided, and for its white hue. Whistling swans, he said. They fly so high, folks' eyes almost never follow them. You've got to live on a mountain and climb to a cloud like a ladder, you might say, to peek at swans going by and to hear what they're talking. But I've watched them up there, and I whittle what I see. She knew it was so. She knew his knife whittled truth. She sat back on her bare heels, scanning in the dimming light this magic wrought by a jackknife that doubly doomed the chances of her fox. But some at the fair might like the heron best, he said, so I'm fotching both. He rewrapped the pieces, put them back against his hard flesh. It's raining considerable, he observed. It's coming on night. Night! She scrambled to her feet. Well, evening. It'll soon be dark as night. I've got to. She was going to say, I've got to be on for the fair. What was the use of going on to the fair? This boy had already won the prize over her fox, her shabby, forlorn little pearwood fox. What else was it Uncle Bide had said? Maybe rich folks, Ellen Beckett, will buy your fox. We'll give you $10, mite. The prize was lost, but there was still the chance for a sale. And Corey, flat on her wasted back, with nothing to do but turn the rustling pages of a mail-order book and dream of things never heard of at Toller's Mountain Store. I've got to get on for Marianborough, cried Ellie. She started down the bank of the run. She fell because leaves were slippery and vines were long. She sprang to her feet. Her shirt was plastered to her skin. She fell again. It was the boy she was fleeing from who yanked her up. He tore her sleeve. In this ravine of brambles and closing dusk, she realized the folly of having veered from the straight course at the gap. "'Pears like," said the boy, panting. "We better look for friendly folks with a roof and a fire." Yes, her lungs ached. Her throat was salty. The trees soon would be black. These were not the woods of Cat Track Hollow. These were foreign parts. She'd asked for the favor of a chair by the fire at the first house they came to. The boy could stay in the barn or go as he pleased. She pushed up the sleeve, which was half ripped from her shoulder. She saw no light, no cabin. The boy, too, was far from home. He knew what was around each bend no better than she. With the third hour, they came to a dwelling. It was dark as the woods. "Everybody's gone to bed, most like," said the boy. He hollered and he pounded the door. Rain splashed down off the roof and onto his back. But the two couldn't go on, singly or together. They'd have to wait for daylight. He pushed open the door. The room gave off a damp smell. "I'll make a fire," he said. He soon had a flame of pine shavings going. Then they could see that there was a one-room log house with a loft. Ranged about the hearth were a straight mountain chair, pans, kettles, and an evil-smelling dye pot. In one corner was a heavy loom. After climbing the ladder, "Nobody home," reported the boy. "But nobody's dead either," he said, looking about the room, "because the clock's still going. They're to the fair, I guess." But there was the beginning of warmth. There was food, too. Cold baked beans in a covered pot. A big savory onion in their depths. Turnip greens and pot liquor. Some rabbit in a stew pan. She knelt at the hearth and swiftly warmed these up. Her garments steamed. She pushed her hair back and tied it with a bit of yarn. She brought plates from the cupboard and placed them on the table. The two travelers ate without speaking. She did not know this boy. She did not even know his name. And their being together made her burn with dismay. If the owners of this house walked in, word of her rashness would go to every cranny of the mountains. It would reach Yawkie's mill and Toller's store. It would reach her grandsir and Uncle Bide and her mother. If the boy, the tall, unspeaking, grave-eyed boy, would just eat and quickly go away. Storm shook the little house. Their meal ended, and he did not go. He built up the fire. Its roaring chimed with the din outside. Waves of heat rolled through the room, drying her clothing to the last thread. The flames died to redness. He moved a cut of firewood up to the hearth and sat down on it, tilting back. He nursed a pipe bowl comfortably. He would go, she decided, when he finished his pipeful. He would go to the shed. She made long work of cleaning the dishes. She loitered away from the fire over by the clay-chinked walls, but she couldn't stand around like this forever. She dropped into the little chair across the hearth from him and sat very still. She remembered her basket, which until supper had not left the clasp of her arm, and drew it close to the chair. She sat, chin in hand, looking up the throat of the chimney, and waiting. Her thoughts left the unstirring boy and took account of the morrow. What if nobody should buy her fox? What if she came home with no good news for Corey? For Corey and that well-hugged book of 1,000 pictures. The boy took his pipe from his lips. "You might as well go to bed." She lifted her chin from hand, stared at him. Now indeed she knew fright. With his pipe he waved toward the ladder, a commanding gesture, as if he were master here. She continued to study his face. His blue eyes didn't waver. Slowly he returned pipe stem to mouth. He leaned back, his shoulders to the fireplace rocks, hands locked behind sun-bleached hair, eyelids half closed. Was he still watching her? Tumult whooped down the chimney, rattled the window shutter, tore at her heart. He remarked, "If you think anybody's going out in this weather, you're wrong. You climb up now and spread out." "No." "You've walked and run a good hard piece, and there's more tomorrow. Better get your rest where there's a balsam needle mattress." "What you aim to do?" Her throat was dry. "Me? What do you suppose?" He leaned forward suddenly and searched her eyes. "You're afraid I'll come up too?" He settled back. "If that's it, go to bed." His laugh was gravelly. "Some girls might be in danger, but you're not." She jerked as if whipped across the face. Yes, she was plain, but he needn't have thrown it up to her like that. Hurt and anger flared in her, who had never given two thoughts to her looks before. Of course she was plain. She had known it. Who wouldn't? Every time she'd glance down at Corey of the even features and sweet lips, often in the spring house pool, she'd seen her own too wide mouth, lump of a nose, and stringy hair. But he needn't have jeered like that. She jumped up and lashed back hotly. You talk. You're not even homely. You're ugly. You've got a sheep's face and horse's teeth. He shrugged and turned to the embers. For a moment she stood in wrath, knuckles at hips, glaring at the back of his head, at his ears that the light glowed through. He paid no attention, but went on sucking his pipe. There was no place for her here, in that chair or in this room. She put her scorn for him into a final glare and climbed the ladder. She found the bed, deep with woven blankets. She sat down on its edge, her bosom heaving. She sat for some time, furious and unrelaxing. She peeped down through the ladder hole. He was sitting motionless. In time, he leaned forward and threw new fuel on the coals. It blazed with a friendly odor. There just isn't anything like hickory bark for a steady flame. He fished through the rest of the firewood and found a block to his liking. He leaned back, wrapped his shanks around his stool, and drew his knife. An hour later, when she peeked again, he was still whittling. The block was cupped in his long fingers, and he was working closely on it. Her legs were tired, were aching from the day's scrambles. She laid back, soaking up the good warmth that eddied from below. The gale plucked and drummed on the roof boards above her face. She'd rest, but she'd keep vigilant. She woke to a shaft of daylight, to the smell of wheat coffee and frying pork. She sat up in panic. She pressed hands about herself from ears to ankles. Convinced she was still in one piece, but alarmed at having slept so soundly, she crept down the ladder. If he'd heard her, he didn't glance around. She said, looking out the open door, "Storm's over." "The woods are wet, but real pretty. Smell the laurel?" "Ain't nothing shinier than wet laurel with the sun dancing on it." They ate breakfast, ate it with relish, stoking their demanding young bodies, though they spoke little. Last night's frankness reared like a wall between them. She'd made up her mind that nothing would stop her from leaving this cabin alone. No one knew she had spent the night under its roof with this boy. She did not mean to be seen traveling a single rod with him. He read her intentions. "You keep on down this branch and then by the main stream. I'll take a while and clean up." She picked up her basket and stepped out into the reborn world. She pressed forward under sparkling trees. And 2 hours before noon, Marionborough came in sight. She was in a dress now, in stockings and shoes worn bravely. She never had supposed a town could be so big. She never had thought maidens could be so pretty, men so bold, though not with her. The men whistled to the pretty girls, walked up to them and walked on with them. A girl as plain as she was as good as invisible. She found the carvings laid out for the judging, and she placed her pearwood fox among them. There were all of 200 other wooden pieces trying for the prize, but not one could compare with her own. There were whittlings of oxen plowing, women churning, women chopping, and men fishing, of hens with chicks and sows with piglets, and lop-eared mules, but none of them came alive like her fox. Her companion of the cabin had not arrived. She moved among the other home craft displays, baskets woven so taut they would hold water, coverlets with odd names, hounds and rabbits, somersaults and leapfrog, General Stuart's victory, wedding on the green, pottery, weather vanes, bread loaves, rugs, jams. In a good-sized room, fiddles squealed, dulcimers and banjos boomed, and the caller cried. Dancers went past an open door, eyes shining, hair rippling, hands extended, making the calicos crack. But Ellie's shoes tortured her. She kept well back. She saw the boy who had breakfast with her in the cabin. So he was here. He pranced by, twirling a girl in a gay green dress. Ellie pulled away and fell in behind the judges. They moved among the displays. "Here is the loaf. Here is the counterpane." The judges reached the whittlings. "Here is a truly excellent applewood bowl." "Yes, but this mare with colt is superior, and so is this little church." She tried to push close, but the crowd was dense. Still she could hear the remarks. Why did they waste so much time? Hadn't they come to the boy's blue heron? Hadn't they found the strong, graceful, heaven-riding swans in line? The swans which fly so high that you almost need a cloud ladder to see them? A curiously lifelike seated figure, this. Yes, but this fox, crouching and biding, alert from nose to tail, ready to leap and away. It, from every standpoint, is the best. For the Pearwood Fox, the prize, $15 to Ellen Beckett of Cat Track Hollow. Oh, that's me! The crowd let her through. Why, it was unbelievable. Corey would spend months choosing from the mail order book. We had to decide, said one of the judges as he placed the prize in her palm, between your fox and the little figure of the woman in the mountain chair. It is tender and appealing, this latter with certain parts of it in excellent detail, but the rest shows hurried work. So we had to declare your fox the winner. She accepted the prize money mutely, for she was in a whirl. Where were the swans, the heron, and what was this figure in the straight-backed chair but a poppet of herself? That torn left sleeve, that basket resting beside the chair, that posture of the sitter, chin in hand. Why, on close look, there was the patch on the knee and the bit of yarn about the hair. But something had been given to the image, something that had lifted this little likeness above reality. The face of the figurine was lovely. It was beautiful. A town-dressed woman plucked Ellie's sleeve. My dear, I will give you $12 for your fox. I dote upon these carvings by you mountain people. May I take it? Of course. Clutching the woman's money, Ellie said to the judge, Can I buy this one for $12? She pointed to the whittling of the girl in the chair. Stated someone who was in charge of the table, Sorry, the owner of that has made it known that it's not for sale. An hour later, with dress and stockings and anguishing shoes back in her basket and patched jeans and torn shirt on her whipstock body, she swung up the homeward path. Marionborough was behind her and Cat Track Holler many miles ahead. She had $27 tied into the tail of her shirt, and Corey would pore over the wish book with new delight, finding something to tempt her sorely on almost every page. A stump startled Ellie by detaching itself from the azaleas. It fell in beside her and walked on in silence. She demanded, Why didn't you put your swans and heron in at the fair? I left them in the cabin to pay for what we ate. Last night you laughed at me for being plain. I am plain. But why did you laugh? So you wouldn't run away. You were tired. You needed sleep. I'm sorry I called you ugly. You aren't ugly. You're only plain like me. He didn't answer. But why, when you carved me, did you make me so beautiful? I told you before. I whittle what I see. She stumbled. He steadied her. He made her stand. He pointed. She wasn't sure she saw. It takes skill to find and follow wild swans passing high in line, but maybe on the mountain tops she could learn.